Um, so um, to introduce myself, I'm Allison Namias. I have no disclosures. And ECHO Autism is funded by the Autism Center of Excellence, as well as the UC Davis Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities and the Northern California LEND program. And so today I'll be talking about how to kind of support coping skills at home. So we'll start with reviewing key concepts from the previous lectures, do a brief introduction about anxiety, and then dive into strategies to promoting coping. So as a review, Amber had started us off thinking about the ACE strategies, so alliance, collaboration, and empowerment. So these are these wonderful strategies to really collaborate and work as partners with parents, which is, particularly important as we're thinking about how we're going to adapt, coping strategies that may have been helpful or worked at school into the home setting. Anne had then talked about how to integrate IEP goals across the day using the activity matrix, and so support the use of visual schedules, which can also be a kind of really important strategy as well for addressing anxiety. Patty had talked about using visual supports and structured work systems, as well as incorporating learner preferences and choices into activities, which can also are important strategies that can help make learning more engaging as when children are struggling. And then last week, Heather did an excellent job talking about the use of positive strategies and really thinking of behavior and behavior challenges as a form of communication that's determined by, antecedents or triggers that come before and consequences that come after. So when we're thinking about anxiety or self-regulation challenges, we also want to think of that as kind of in our D box, and there are, different antecedents and consequences on either end that can be maintaining or promoting anxiety during a certain time. So when we think about anxiety, it's a normal and adaptive emotion, and it can manifest in three typical forms, either as fight. So, with our kids, it can also come out as, tantrums or yelling or aggression. Flight, which is that typical escape behavior, kind of hiding under the desk, eloping out of the classroom, just trying to get out of the situation that's anxiety provoking. Or freeze, where that kind of panic, mind goes blank, nothing wants, not doing anything. And it typically takes the form of a combination of physical symptoms. So this can be, shaking, feeling faint, feeling wobbly, having a rapid heartbeat. Oftentimes there's combined with worries or intrusive thoughts. So with our little anxiety here, she's very worried about, tasting weird, or if no one likes her, or if she's too hot or too cold, or, she's perfect this time and never lives up to it. And it's usually combined with some sort of fear and avoidance. So that can be of specific familiar situations, of future events, or coming right now, of uncertainty and not being able to know what the future entails. And anxiety serves function, and can be really adaptive at times. So if you have a situation like a car is coming, you might have an anxious response of, oh, there's a car coming, your heart starts racing, might get a little sweaty. Oh, I might get hit, I should jump back from the curb. You escape the situation of getting hit by a car and you feel relieved. Great, I'm relieved, that worked, I didn't get hit. The next time it happens, you're going to be more likely to jump back from the curb when a car's coming. So in this situation, it's a really appropriate adaptive way to respond to anxiety symptoms. It's keeping safe. Similarly, in times like now where there's really a lot of change and a lot of uncertainty, it's expected that children and adults and parents and teachers and everyone is going to be really more stressed and more anxious, because we don't have a mental model of the situation. The kind of prolonged and chronic stress and the high level uncertainty about the future that everyone is facing now is really new for students and parents and providers. And our brains are wired with a negative bias, so that we tend to expect the worst from situations where we don't know what to expect. And particularly for our students with autism, research has found that the fear of change is more common and almost a unique anxiety disorder in children with ASD. So the whole population is feeling more stressed and anxious during this time, but especially our children with ASD are likely having a harder time because of this increased fear of change in general. And just because we're in this unique time with a unique amount of chronic stress and uncertainty of change, doesn't mean that we need to completely recreate the wheel and try to think of a whole new way to teach our kids to cope. So thankful about stepping back and starting with strategies that may have been helpful for the student in the past. So for the first survey, if Amber can be or Robin can be my excellent helper to launch it. To think about kind of what strategies have you typically used in your classroom to teach or help students with coping? Requires a little bit of scrolling, but thinking about if use social stories or sensory strategies, the incredible 5-point scale, visual supports, power cards, cognitive behavioral interventions, exposure treatment, deep breathing. All right. Okay. Well, that's also, it looks like most people familiar with using visual supports and deep breathing strategies. A good percentage have used sensory breaks or social stories, and then the power cards and cognitive behavioral interventions and exposure-based treatments are less familiar, and about 70% of people have used 5-point scales. So that's helpful to get a sense of kind of what those strategies are that you're familiar with and the students may be familiar with having. So kind of as a starting point and a starting point to think about talking to parents about is that how parents and teachers respond in difficult situations becomes a model for children. So how parents are acting in this uncertain time, how they see their kids see their teachers acting can really model ways for the child to think about appropriate ways of expressing their emotions and coping in situations. So by setting up opportunities for children to express how they're feeling, normalize and validate children's feeling that it's normal to feel worried or stressed or frustrated right now, and modeling adaptive ways of expressing those emotions. So, having parents or teachers talk about how, oh, it's different now to be teaching over Zoom. I miss seeing you in person, but I know that I'll get to see you in the future. And by being able to see you now, that's better than not being able to see you at all. So kind of talking aloud how they're feeling and coping and those adaptive ways that they're personally using can help really normalize for kids and generate ideas for kids of other ways to cope in these uncertain situations. Other opportunities for kids to express how they're feeling can be journaling or drawing, or just having discussions or making video journals, kind of giving that outlet for students to really express how they're feeling during this time. Building on what Heather talked about last week, one of the triggers that she had mentioned prevention strategies can be really useful for is change. And so dive a little bit more into that for. So one thing that can be really helpful for our students when they're feeling anxious or uncertain is to increase predictability. So a key piece of that would be maintaining familiar routines. So where our typical daily schedule, these yellow class times may have happened at school, now we're thinking about, okay, how can we keep maybe the order the same so that there's things that are familiar or about the same time of day, things that we're waking up and going to bed, so that the whole day doesn't feel as different, and that there's still some things that are familiar and common during this uncertain time. A key aspect of the familiar routines that is really important for families to be thinking about and incorporating is keeping the bedtime routine consistent and making sure that students are getting enough sleep, because that can really have a lot of downstream effects in terms of learning and regulation skills if kids aren't sleeping well at night. And so I do have some resources at the end for the Autism Speaks ATM Sleep Toolkit that has a lot of great strategies for parents to support sleeping in kids with autism. Another way to increase predictability for students that Anne had talked about was using a visual schedule, so really laying out for students kind of what to expect from the day. And I think a lot of teachers have mentioned sending home the visual schedules that they use in school. It's also thinking with parents, how can we build on that visual schedule to incorporate the whole day? So from wake up to dinner, and not just those school activities. So really taking that broader approach to all, since we're thinking of the whole day as an opportunity for learning with our matrix, we also want that to be represented on the schedule. And, as Anna had pointed out, preparing students for change where, putting on the schedule if there's a change coming. So having kind of that indicate on the schedule if this is going to be different. Another way to increase predictability is to use social narratives, which most of us are familiar with. So this is a way to describe situations in detail and give examples of appropriate reads to respond. And it really helps prepare students to, have kind of that mental model for what to expect and be able to adapt their behaviors based on the situation. So the most common one that people are familiar with is the Social Stories by Carol Gray. And so she does have on her website a social story about pandemics and the coronavirus, and is working on getting has translated into a couple of different languages, and also is working on some related stories related to wearing a mask. And Anne has been integral in helping kind of roll out some new relevant stories. So if for some reason you need to work with a family to develop a new story, it's important to follow the structure that Carol Gray recommends. So there's 7 different types of sentences that could be included. So this includes descriptive, perspective, sentences that coach and direct, affirmative and partial sentences. And a key piece of the social stories is that you want there to be much more of the describe, perspective taking, and affirmative sentences than those coaching directive sentences. The goal is really for the story to be positive and affirming and not too much in kind of giving instructions of what a student needs to do. Another type of social narrative is the power cards. So these are visual aids that can incorporate the student's special interest or kind of superhero or hero that they like to help promote understanding of social situations and prepare them for coping in a different situation. So an example of this would be this social story for a kid who is a fan of Michael Jordan, and it's about encouraging practicing of skills. So the front side of this card will have a short story that's explaining kind of part of the skill that you want to encourage in the student related to their hero or superhero. And then the back side of this card has those key pieces of information that you want the child to learn. And so it's another way to kind of give the child something that maybe they could carry around in their pocket, and that it incorporates their interest to help prepare them in situations when you want them to learn a new skill. Another coping strategy that a lot of you mentioned being familiar with is using kind of sensory or calming routines. And so when we're thinking about working with families about this, it's helping them embed these calming routines into the daily schedule so that, things that probably were familiar in the classroom of the kid having the option to take a sensory break, or maybe there's a nap time or a recess time or a free play time, helping families recognize that this is something kind of that's important for the kids to kind of get that dose of self-regulation in during their day, and can be something that can be embedded in their schedule. Of course, this calming routine is going to look different for each kid depending on the student, what the family has available, what's feasible for them. It can be helpful to help the family think about a location for a calming spot or corner like you may have had in your classroom. And really, thinking about if there's ways to start with familiar strategies that the, student had been successful with already. If the, student responded really well to, hearing a certain story read or a certain song or music, even thinking about, sending a video of yourself reading that to them so that it's something that's at least a bit more familiar than the, completely having to recreate the routine from scratch at home. But, even if it is a familiar skill, it's going to be taught and reinforced like any new skill, because we're now expecting a student to generalize into a new environment, which is going to be, a challenge for our students who already struggle with generalization. So we'll have the best luck with familiar strategies, but we know they may not work as well at home, and will still need to be reinforced and taught like a new skill. So some possible relaxation and calming strategies, which like I got from the wonderful Teach website. So I want to give a shout out to Teach for that, because they came up with a great list of resources. So, kind of thinking about either with the parent or, with the child, if they're verbal enough, kind of what strategies they think would be helpful to them to calm their mind and to calm their body, if they want to take a break and think about their favorite topics or draw or color. If there's a favorite song that they like to listen to, is it using deep breathing or a sensory fidget, squeezing a squeeze ball, especially, not having PE or recess and being able to go outside enough. Exercise is a really great one to encourage families to think about ways to incorporating into their day and into the child's schedule, because it can really help get some energy out. And we have research that shows that exercise can reduce anxiety. So kind of deep breathing can look different in different ways depending on the level of the student and the interest of the student. So it could be kind of a little GIF like this that kind of, shows when to inhale and exhale and follow. It could be a visual that's kind of saying, inhale, hold for 6 seconds, exhale, hold for 8 seconds. A visual of smelling the roses or blowing out the candle, if that's something that the student is familiar with. For some kids, they may do better with a tangible object that they have to, breathe in and blow rather than just the visual. So blowing on a pinwheel or blowing bubbles. And there's also a cute video from Sesame Street on YouTube that they have a belly breathing song that also teaches belly breathing and how to take deep breaths. Another strategy that can be helpful is progressive muscle relaxation. So this is a process of progressively moving through the body and tensing and releasing each of the muscles. So starting with hands and arms, and then moving down to shoulders, neck, stomach, legs, and feet. So the kind of traditional relaxation strip starts with squeezing lemons in your hand, then you're stretching your arms and shoulders with a lazy cat, shoulders and neck as a turtle, chewing, opening and closing your mouth as a jawbreaker bubble gum, squeezing in and putting out your stomach as you're going through a narrow fence, and kind of stepping your legs and feet in the mud puddle. And so they do have on YouTube kind of the traditional relaxation script that you can play. I tend to find that it's a great way, and I'll include in the resources, the script that you can adapt as a way to incorporate kids' interests. So for a kid who's really into Pokemon, suddenly it becomes, Pokemon squeezing different things, or fighting, or it can kind of be a way to incorporate kids' interest into something that, seems like a little bit of work to encourage them to center and relax. So there's kind of, in addition to YouTube Sesame Street and progressive muscle relaxation videos, there's also a lot of mindfulness, calming, and exercise apps out there that have, different costs. Most of them are free. And so this could be a resource for families of wanting something that, the kids can do at home, and not feel like they need to recreate the wheel in terms of finding a new, relaxation or exercise strategy. So as much as we hope that kind of those antecedent and prevention strategies of increasing predictability and incorporating those self-regulation breaks during the day would help, there's always going to be times where there's still going to be change and uncertainty that pops up that we couldn't prepare for. And so working with students to think about developing scripts or mantras for those changes ahead of time. So practicing thinking about rolling with the punches or identifying whether or not something's a big deal or a little deal, encouraging kind of using your stretchy brain. So rather than being rigid, thinking about how to kind of stretch our brain and be more flexible and be kind of helpful in thinking about how to cope with changing circumstances. It'd be great to also come up with bravery mantras that incorporate kids' interests. So for kids who are interested in Batman or Frozen or Taylor Swift, kind of using something that they're interested in as a model for how to be brave or deal with these uncertain situations. When we're thinking about longer term self-regulation skills, so what we hope kids to be able to do in the future, it can be helpful to work with kids to identify different levels of emotion. And so this could be another great place to incorporate their interests. So kind of having a little Pokemon, little Pikachu's a little bit scared, the middle one's a medium scared, and the top one's very big scared. Using incredible 5-point systems to think about, okay, there's different levels of feelings, and then what different strategies they could use at that different level. If parents are reporting significant behavior changes, or they're reporting a lot of anxiety, this may be signs that kind of additional mental health or behavioral support or referrals are warranted. So that could be a case where cognitive behavioral interventions for anxiety could be helpful. And because families are isolated and talking to their teachers, you may be kind of the first people to be hearing about, oh, this sounds like a different behavior from our student and more than we'd expect from the changes in the circumstances that might warrant additional supports and referrals. And I just wanted to end by reminding that when we're thinking about the situation, the flexibility and patience is key on everyone's part. Everyone, parents, students, and providers are all kind of under stress during uncertain times. So it's really important to partner with parents and the rest of the team to think about, how can we be, flexible on all sides to support the students learning as much as possible. And if we're, expecting and teaching our students to be flexible, how can we model that on our end as well? So whether it's, maybe all the work and if we wanted to get done won't get done, or maybe parents really aren't in a place that they can, implement this whole routine or all this homework that we wanted. How can we work with families and meet them where they are, whatever their level of stress and coping is. And so these are just some additional resources that are related to supporting individuals with autism throughout certain times. The Carol Gray social stories, other social narratives, and other resources that can be shared with families to promote coping during COVID. And I will stop there.